cultural differences can be a matter of life and death. That's what two Scottish businessmen tragically discovered during what should have been a routine celebration in Texas.
You know, what makes this story so compelling is how it starts with something completely ordinary. Just two colleagues wanting to celebrate a successful deal.
Right. And what's fascinating is how Douglas and Oliver were operating on what anthropologists call cultural autopilot. Those deeply ingrained social behaviours we don't even think about until we're somewhere they don't apply.
Hmm, that's interesting because in Scotland, statistics show that community-based problem solving is still prevalent. About 78% of people say they regularly help strangers in their neighbourhood.
And that cultural context is crucial here. These weren't just random drunk guys. They were successful businessmen who, back home, could literally walk into their neighbours' yards to ask for directions without anyone batting an eye.
Well, that's exactly what makes this story so tragic. The complete mismatch between Scottish and Texan cultural norms around personal space and property rights.
You know what's particularly relevant here? A recent study showed that property-related defensive shootings are 23 times more common in Texas than in the entire United Kingdom. It's just a fundamentally different approach to personal space and security.
That's such a stark contrast. How did they not know about these differences?
Well, that's where alcohol comes into play. Studies show that even moderate alcohol consumption reduces our ability to read social cues by about 50%, and these guys had been drinking heavily enough to get lost.
And you know what makes this even more complex? Texas has some of the strongest property protection laws in America. The Castle Doctrine there gives homeowners significant legal protection when using force against perceived intruders.
Right. And here's where cultural anthropology gives us some insight. In collectivist societies like Scotland, there's this concept of shared social space that just doesn't exist in more individualistic cultures like Texas.
The timing of all this is particularly tragic. They were literally hours away from flying home.
And get this, according to travel safety statistics, about 65% of serious incidents involving international business travellers occur during leisure time after business is concluded. It's like people let their guard down once the work is done.
So if we look at the sequence of events, they actually tried doing things the right way first, knocking on front doors, attempting to get help properly.
Exactly. And this speaks to something called cultural fatigue, where after multiple failed attempts to navigate a foreign social situation, people often default back to what works at home. In this case, that default proved fatal.
The speed of the tragedy is what really gets me. From the moment they entered that backyard to the shots being fired, it was probably less than a minute.
And here's something that really puts this in perspective. A recent international business travel study showed that less than 15% of companies provide any kind of cultural safety training to their employees traveling abroad.
That's shockingly low considering how many cultural misunderstandings happen every day, though usually with less tragic consequences.
You know what's particularly relevant? The International Business Travel Association now recommends a minimum of 2 hours of cultural awareness training for any business trip longer than 3 days. A guideline that's followed by less than 20% of companies.
Well, that certainly raises questions about corporate responsibility in international business travel.
It does. And some legal experts argue that companies could potentially be liable for not preparing their employees for these kinds of cultural differences. Since this incident, Several major corporations have actually implemented mandatory cultural safety briefings.
Looking ahead, what do you think needs to change to prevent something like this from happening again?
Well, experts suggest a three-pronged approach. First, better corporate training programs. Second, more detailed cultural briefings from hotels and travel services. And third, improved international business protocols around after-hours activities.
Those sound like practical steps that could make a real difference.
And you know what's encouraging? Several international business organizations are now developing standardized cultural safety protocols, something that didn't exist when Douglas and Oliver made their fatal mistake.
This whole story really drives home how important it is to understand local customs and norms when traveling.
Absolutely right. And as international business travel returns to pre-pandemic levels, with an expected 35% increase this year alone, these kinds of cultural awareness issues are becoming more critical than ever.
So the key takeaway here is that cultural differences aren't just about social faux pas. They can have serious, sometimes fatal consequences.
Exactly. And while we can't change what happened to Douglas and Oliver, their story is now being used in cultural awareness training programs worldwide, potentially saving lives by highlighting how critical it is to understand and respect local customs and norms.